I didn't mean to overhear her. Not really. It was late, the kind of late where the hum of the fluorescent light in the corner feels louder than anything else. I was locking up the little repair shop where I worked part-time, sweeping the dust from the floor into uneven piles. That's when I heard her voice, low, clipped, the kind of voice that could slice clean through a room. Go away. The words weren't for me. She was at the counter, talking to a man older than me, maybe her husband, maybe not. He laughed like he didn't take her seriously, but I caught the way her shoulders stiffened, the way her hand lingered on her purse strap like she was ready to bolt. He left with a scoff, muttering something I couldn't make out. And then, just like that, the silence belonged to us. She didn't look at me right away. She was in her 40s, maybe mid-40s, confident in the way she held herself, like she'd lived long enough not to explain things twice. Her hair was pulled back, not neatly but deliberately, a few strands falling loose around her face. I realized I was staring too long when she finally turned toward me, eyes sharp, measuring. "You're still open?" she asked, her tone softer now, but not by much. "Sort of," I said, leaning awkwardly on the broom. "I mean, technically no, but I'm still here." The corner of her mouth twitched, not a smile, but something like it. She set her keys on the counter with a metallic clink. "My car," she said. "It's making a sound. I don't trust it to get me home." I nodded, trying to look like I knew what I was doing. The truth was, I'd just started here a month ago. But I couldn't tell her that. Not when she looked at me with that mix of expectation and exhaustion. "Pop the hood," I said, and my voice cracked just enough to make me wince. She raised an eyebrow. "You sure you're old enough to be under there?" Heat rose in my neck. I wanted to tell her I was 23, not 16, but the words tangled. Instead, I just grabbed a rag and forced a laugh. "Guess you'll find out." The next few minutes were filled with the smell of oil and the faint scrape of tools. She hovered nearby, not in the way customers usually did. She didn't fill the silence with nervous chatter. She just watched, like she wanted me to know she was paying attention. When I wiped my hands and closed the hood, I said, "It's the alternator. Not a huge deal, but it'll need a proper fix. You could drive it tonight, though carefully." She tapped her nails lightly against the counter, thinking. That little sound, steady, unhurried, somehow felt louder than the buzzing light overhead. "You don't talk much, do you?" she asked suddenly. I almost laughed again, but stopped, because she wasn't teasing. She was curious. "I talk," I said, "just not when I don't know what to say." Another pause. Then she leaned closer, her voice dropping, as if sharing something with me she hadn't meant to. "That man earlier, he doesn't listen when I tell him to go away." "Not really." I froze. I didn't know why she was telling me this, some stranger sweeping up grease and dust. But the weight of her words lingered, heavy and fragile at the same time. I should have said something smart, or nothing at all. Instead, what slipped out was, "Only if you come with me." The words hung there between us, reckless and raw. She didn't answer, not directly. Just studied me, head tilted, her expression unreadable. And when she finally left, keys jingling in her hand, I realized I'd been holding my breath. That night, I lay awake replaying it, the quiet hum of the shop, the look in her eyes, and the way my own words still echoed in the silence. She came back 2 days later. Not at night this time, but mid-afternoon, when the shop smelled less like oil and more like dust warming in the sun. I was sorting parts in the back, half distracted, when I heard the bell over the door. I knew it was her before I looked up, something in the rhythm of her steps, unhurried but firm. "You again," I said, pretending not to sound relieved. "Me again," she replied, placing her bag on the counter. Her tone was lighter than before, but her eyes, darker today, ringed with a faint shadow, carried the weight of a woman who hadn't slept enough. The car needed more than she'd thought. That's what she told me, though she didn't look entirely interested in the explanation I gave about the alternator. Instead, she leaned back against the counter, arms crossed, listening but not really. I couldn't stop noticing the small things. The way her fingers traced circles against her sleeve without realizing. The way her laugh slipped out too quick when I made a weak joke about old cars having more personality than people. It wasn't the laugh itself, though it was low and soft, the kind that made me want to hear it again. But how fast it faded, like she caught herself being unguarded and pulled the walls back up. "You should probably take a seat," I said when I saw how pale she looked under the fluorescent light. She hesitated. "I'm fine standing." "Still," I insisted, wiping my hands on the rag and pulling out the stool we kept behind the counter. "It's going to be a while." For a moment, she looked at the stool like it was a trap. Then, finally, she sat, exhaling slowly as if she'd been holding her breath all day. From this angle, she looked different. Softer. Not the sharp, confident figure I'd first seen, but someone carrying too much in silence. "You don't strike me as the type who talks while working," she said. I smiled without looking up from the bolts I was tightening. "You don't strike me as the type who comes back twice in 1 week." That earned me the smallest of pauses. I glanced up, and there it was, that flicker in her eyes, something almost vulnerable. She looked down at her hands quickly, twisting her ring, and the silence stretched thin between us. I wanted to ask about the man from the other night, about why she looked so tired, but I didn't. Instead, I kept my eyes on the car, tightening bolts that didn't need tightening, because the air between us already felt too fragile to break. When I finally looked back, she was watching me, not with the guarded sharpness from before, but with something quieter, curious, almost grateful. "You're different," she said softly, as though she hadn't meant to say it out loud. My hand stilled on the wrench. She must have realized it too, because she straightened, tucking her hair behind her ear, her mask slipping back into place. Forget I said that. But I couldn't. The words stuck, heavier than anything else that afternoon. And when she left, the stool still warm from where she'd sat, I caught myself staring at the space she'd occupy. The rain came down hard that night, the kind that made the shop windows rattle and the gutters outside spill over like broken faucets. I was about to lock up early when I saw her headlights cut through the storm. She stepped inside, shaking the water from her hair. Her coat clung to her shoulders, and for a moment she just stood there, catching her breath as though she'd run from something more than the rain. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my pulse had quickened the second I saw her silhouette in the doorway. Her eyes flicked toward me, then away. "Car again," she said, setting her keys on the counter. But I didn't believe it. The car was fine. I'd fixed it myself. "Still," I nodded, took the keys, and went through the motions, lifting the hood, checking parts that didn't need checking. She stayed inside, arms wrapped around herself as thunder rolled outside. "You didn't have to come tonight," I said finally, leaning against the hood. "Tomorrow would have been fine." She hesitated, then spoke so quietly I almost missed it. Tomorrow felt too far. I froze. She must have realized what she'd said, because she let out a nervous laugh and shook her head. "Forget it. I'm just tired. Ignore me." But I couldn't. Not when her voice cracked just enough to betray her. The storm grew louder, pressing us closer together, even though neither of us moved. I busied myself wiping down tools, stealing glances when I thought she wasn't looking. Her hair was damp, curling slightly at the ends. Her fingers tapped restlessly against the counter, nails clicking in uneven rhythm. "Do you ever feel like you're waiting for something?" she asked suddenly, her gaze fixed on the floor. The question wasn't for me, not really, but it landed in my chest all the same. "Yeah," I said after a long pause. "All the time." For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't heavy. It was taut, like a wire stretched thin. I wanted to tell her that I noticed everything. The way her laugh always stopped too soon, the way she avoided her own reflection in the glass door, the way she came here when she didn't need to. But before I could speak, her phone buzzed against the counter. The screen lit up with a name I didn't know. She glanced at it, jaw tightening, then flipped it face down without answering. She caught me watching. "Don't," she said, her voice low. "Don't ask." I nodded, but the air between us was already different. Closer, sharper. When I handed her back the keys, our fingers brushed, barely, a second too long to be accidental. Neither of us moved right away. I should have pulled back. Instead, I held still, heart pounding, the storm outside echoing the one in my chest. And just as I opened my mouth to say something reckless, something true, The lights flickered from the storm and cut to Black D, as if she hadn't fully gone. The storm had passed, but the air inside the shop still felt charged, heavy with something we hadn't dared name. The lights flickered back on after a few seconds, humming faintly as though nothing had happened. But everything had. That brush of her hand against mine, the stillness that followed, it hadn't left the room. She didn't take her keys right away. Instead, she leaned against the counter, staring at the wet streaks of rain on the glass door. Her reflection looked blurred, ghost-like, as though she barely recognized herself. I didn't know whether to say something or stay quiet. My throat felt tight, words trapped there, useless. Finally, she broke the silence. "What are we doing?" Her voice was steady, but the tremor underneath betrayed her. She didn't look at me when she asked, as if the question itself was dangerous. I swallowed. "You mean right now?" A humorless laugh slipped from her lips. "No, I mean this. Whatever this is." She gestured faintly between us, like the space itself was evidence. I didn't answer. Couldn't. Because admitting anything would make it real, and yet denying it would feel like lying. She sighed, pressing her palms flat against the counter. Her fingers trembled just enough to notice if you were watching closely, and I was. "I'm old enough to know better," she whispered. "And you're—" She stopped herself, finally meeting my eyes. The weight in them made me forget how to breathe. "You're not supposed to matter like this." The words lodged in my chest, sharp and impossible to ignore. I tried to speak, but all that came out was a rough exhale. I wanted to tell her that I hadn't meant for any of this either, that I didn't know why her laugh stayed with me, why her tired eyes kept me awake at night. But saying it out loud would push us somewhere we couldn't come back from. The silence stretched again, long, fragile. Finally, I forced out the only thing that felt safe. "Then maybe I should stay away." She looked at me for a long time, like she was measuring the shape of me against her own restraint. Then she shook her head, almost imperceptibly. "No," she said softly. "That's worse." Her honesty hit harder than if she'd reached across the counter and touched me. And in that quiet, with nothing left between us but a line neither of us had crossed yet, I realized something terrifying. She was right. Because staying away suddenly felt impossible. The shop was empty when she came in again. No storm this time, no flickering lights. Just the lazy hum of the ceiling fan and the smell of grease that never really left the air. She looked different, not in how she dressed, but in the way she carried herself. Her shoulders seemed heavier, her gaze distant, like she'd left something unfinished behind her. I didn't ask. I just slid her keys across the counter, even though her car didn't need fixing anymore. She took them without looking, fingers brushing mine for the briefest second before retreating. "You keep showing up," I said finally, not as an accusation, but as an observation I couldn't hold back. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh, but it caught halfway. "And you keep letting me." We stood in that uneven silence, both pretending to be busy. Me wiping down tools that were already clean, her adjusting the strap of her bag though it hadn't slipped. Then her phone buzzed in her pocket. She didn't check it right away. When she finally did, she froze. For a moment, she just stared at the screen, unreadable. Then, almost carelessly, she set it face down on the counter between us. The name on the screen had burned itself into my memory before she hit it. "Daniel. You remind me of him," she said suddenly, her voice low, as though the words had been pressing against her ribs for too long. I frowned. "Who?" She hesitated, then sighed. "My brother. He died when I was 25. He was younger than me. Stubborn. Reckless. Always thought he could fix things no one else could." She gave me a look then, pointed, almost sharp, like she was daring me to flinch. The air shifted. The distance between us wasn't the same anymore. "I shouldn't even be telling you this," she muttered, looking down at her hands. "But when you talk, when you laugh, even the way you stand sometimes, it's like he's right here again. And I don't know what to do with that." Her voice cracked on the last word. Just barely. I didn't move. Didn't know how. Part of me wanted to step closer, to say something that could hold her together. But another part of me felt like I'd been shoved into a role I didn't understand, a ghost I couldn't possibly live up to. She must have felt my hesitation, because she straightened quickly, tucking her hair behind her ear like armor sliding back into place. "Forget I said that," she whispered. But I couldn't. The confession rattled inside me, too heavy to ignore, too fragile to touch. When she finally left, the shop felt unbearably quiet, and I found myself staring at the stool she'd sat on before, realizing the truth. I wasn't just caught up in her. I was tangled in her past, too. Days passed before I saw her again. Long enough for me to think maybe she'd decided the distance was safer. But one evening, just before closing, she slipped through the door like she always had. Quiet, careful, as though she wasn't sure if she belonged here anymore. I didn't say her name, just nodded toward the stool, and she sat without protest. The shop was hushed, softer than usual, the hum of the lights barely audible. Outside, the sun was slipping down, painting everything in the color of endings. I kept wiping down the same wrench, not for the work, but because my hands needed something to do. "You're angry," she said finally, her voice steady, but too low to be casual. "I'm not," I answered. "Just confused." Her eyes flicked to me, then away. "So am I." The silence stretched. Not brittle this time, but thick, like it carried everything we hadn't said. "I shouldn't keep coming here," she murmured. "You've said that before." And I meant it. She smiled, but it was faint, weary. But I still came. Something loosened in my chest. I set the wrench down, leaning against the counter, close enough now to see the tired lines around her eyes, the small scar just above her lip, the way her breathing slowed when she realized how close I was. "I'm not him," I said quietly. The words felt heavier than I expected. "I'll never be him." Her gaze met mine, unwavering. "I know." She didn't move at first, and neither did I. It wasn't dramatic, not a sudden rush forward. Just a slow, inevitable shift, her hand resting on the counter, mine moving just enough until our fingers brushed. Not grasping, not holding, just touching, and it was enough. The world outside kept moving, cars passing, voices carrying faintly through the street. But in that moment, it felt like the shop had folded in on itself, leaving only us, sitting in the middle of a truth we could no longer deny. "This won't be easy," she whispered, as though admitting it out loud might break the spell. "I know," I said, and that was it. No grand declarations, no promises we couldn't keep. Just two people, breathing the same quiet air, hands barely touching on a scarred wooden counter. When she finally stood to leave, she didn't take her hand away immediately. She let it linger, long enough to make sure I'd remember. And I knew I would. Always. Looking back now, I can't tell you the exact moment it shifted. Maybe it was the night of the storm, when the lights went out and we could hear our own breathing louder than the thunder. Maybe it was the day she told me about her brother, and for the first time I understood that her silences weren't empty, they were full of ghosts. Or maybe it was simpler. Maybe it was just the way her hand stayed against mine that evening, steady and unafraid, like she'd finally decided to stop fighting gravity. I'm different now. I notice things I used to overlook. The pauses between words, the weight people carry in their shoulders, the way someone's laughter can die too quickly if they don't trust themselves to feel joy. She taught me that, not with lessons or speeches, but with the way she moved through her own broken edges and still showed up anyway. And her? She let herself rest. Just a little. She let herself sit on that old stool, close her eyes, and exist without apology. She didn't need to be sharp all the time. She didn't need to be untouchable. With me, she could be tired, unguarded, human. We never said the words. Not then, not in the way stories usually demand. There was no declaration under the rain, no dramatic kiss in the half-lit shop. What we had was quieter, smaller, and somehow stronger for it. It was in the way she let me walk her to her car without protest. In the way I kept her secrets without needing to ask why. In the way silence became less frightening, because it wasn't empty anymore. What did I learn? That love doesn't always arrive like a firework. Sometimes it sneaks in through the cracks of ordinary days, through late nights at work, tired smiles, the hum of fluorescent lights. Sometimes it feels less like falling and more like collapsing gently into a truth you already knew. And maybe that's enough. More than enough. When she looked at me that last time before leaving, her hand still warm against mine, Her eyes finally soft. I realized we weren't pretending anymore. Whatever we were, whatever we'd become, it was real. And that's the kind of story that lingers. If you've made it this far, tell me in the comments. Would you have walked away or stayed, even when you knew it wouldn't be easy?